Thank you for your interest here at North Hills, where we are more than Sunday. If you have any questions or would like to know more about our ministries, you can always visit us online at north-hills.org. Now join us as Pastor Bill delivers his message.
Well, we are starting a sermon series. This is my first contribution to that series. It began last week with Pastor James, and we're talking about the importance of other people and how we as individuals really take second place in life. Really, when you think about it, you guys are so important today, especially if you're a guest. If you're a guest for the first time, I'm really glad you're here. You have my total attention. This is my time to give to you as a family. I don't want anything to distract us, anything to get out of the way or in the way. But I want Christ followers to know other people are important. Other people have a place of priority, and you are important. Excuse me just a minute. Hello? Hey. Yeah, cut that off for a minute. Excuse me just a minute. Where was I? Oh yeah, I was talking about you are so important. You are the reason I am here. Give yourself a hand clap. Give your health. Don't you hate it when you're in the middle of this intense conversation, you're sharing your soul, you're opening up an intimate part of your life, and all of a sudden, you know, there's the under-the-table texting that some people have mastered. And that's when you're at a meeting and you're trying to look like you're tracking with the person that's talking and you're giving it this. In all seriousness, folks, we are starting this build-up to the 40th celebration for North Hills. It's going to be the weekend of September the 18th, 19th, 16th, 17th, 18th, that whole weekend is going to be kind of filled with exciting things. We've got some improvements, some changes. We're going to have some painting going on, some floor renovation. You've seen some landscaping outside. Why are we doing all this? We're doing it because God's given us a vision 40 years ago to take our needs and to place them below the needs of others so that we can show people that we love and care for them in practical ways. That's always been my motto. I came to this church and I told people one thing I love to do is to find ways to show people the love of Jesus that's very practical. Now the downside to that is I can't always do that. And you can't always do it either. So what we do as Christ followers is we try to set our minds and our thoughts on someone else who came up with this weird kind of philosophy in life 2,000 years ago, a man whose picture we've never seen, a man who never wrote a book, a man who, as far as we know, never sung a song, a man that was never married, never had a family, a man who claimed to be God and was killed for that claim. And he came up with this saying, and he basically said, I'm not as important as the people I have come to disclose myself to. Now, we've got to think about that for just a moment, because in life, when we think about being second, as James already said, and as we've seen in the Olympics, coming in second really is no boaster. I mean, people don't usually say with excitement they came in second. But yet, how many of you would love to be like the number 2 paid football player in America? Anybody here would go for number 2, 3, 10, 20? How many of you would just like to get a football salary? Okay. So we're in this series and we're thinking about what it means to be second, and we're using the teachings of Jesus. So if some of you are here today and you've committed your life to Jesus and you've tried to walk the walk and talk the talk, but it's really been hard and you've given up at times, or you've strayed, you've left church, you've come back today, you're going to maybe give it another try. Or some of you, like me, who just try, and oftentimes we fail, we don't get it right, we get up and we try again. Or maybe if you're here today and you're saying, I don't know about this Jesus guy, I'm here because life's a mess, and my girlfriend said that if I show up today, it'll be better, and she'll promise to take me out to lunch, and really I'm here for the lunch. That's okay if Jesus can speak on behalf of a promised lunch. Then I think it's okay for you to be here, but to have an open mind, thinking that whatever it is that's causing you your pain is probably connected somehow to the way you see yourself. It's probably connected somehow to the way other people see yourself. And what we're saying in this sermon series is what Jesus said, and that is found in Philippians chapter 2. And we're going to look at that real quick because this is setting the stage for kind of the whole sermon series. And in Philippians chapter 2, Paul, who's this fantastic guy who's gone through all the different schools, he's got all the degrees, he came from a purebred family, he's well known. He got to a place in his life where he realized that what he was doing was a waste of time. He literally said, everything that I do can be described as that which gets flushed out of the toilet, and I care so much more for Jesus now that I've come to know him, that everything else that I've done in myself literally can just... And as he's writing this to this group of people in Philippi, he's bearing his soul in what he's saying, and maybe many of you identify with that, is I am so unworthy in who I am and what I do by myself, that unless I can figure out what's important in life, I'm going to go through life thinking about me, myself, and I will care very little about other people. You know, have you ever heard the joke about the guy that thinks he's so important and he's so paranoid and people are always talking about him that he goes to a football game, and when they gather together in the huddle, he thinks they're talking about him? Have you ever heard that before? We get to a place in life where we sometimes think that the world spins around us and our needs. And this guy named Paul had gotten to that place in life, and he thought he was important. He thought he was so important that he was going to go get other people who disagreed with him, other people who were worshiping this Jesus that he was trying to stop from being heard, and he was trying to put them in jail because Paul actually had the audacity to think he was right and everybody else was wrong. And he tried to arrest this Jesus. Jesus had died. He was part of that group. I'm not sure exactly his participation in that process. He had to have been at work somewhere when Jesus was preaching those 3 years. He'd never met Jesus, but on the way to putting other Christians in jail, Jesus came to him. And through a voice that spoke from heaven, this guy Paul literally fell off his high horse, lying on the ground, and Jesus spoke to him and said, Paul, why are you going through so much pain and trouble trying to stop me? In that moment, Paul's life was changed. Many of you have experienced that yourselves. 40 years ago, actually 42 years ago, in 1974, I experienced a life-changing experience that literally knocked me off my high horse. The problem is that pride and humanity and sin causes us, at least me, to continue to try to get back up on my high horse. And what I have to continually be reminded is what Paul said about Jesus. If you have your Bible, turn to the 2nd chapter of Philippians. The key passage, or we call this the anchor passage that we're working with, begins in verse 3. And it really is a strange way for Paul to describe the person of Jesus, because everything about us tells us that Jesus should be the most important person in this New Testament world in which he came, but yet Jesus speaks differently about himself, and this is what we need to hear about us. And that's why the sermon series is called I Am Second. Paul says, don't do anything that's from selfish ambition or conceit, but do everything in humility. Count others as being more significant than others, and don't let your cell phone ring when you're in the middle of a meeting. Well, he didn't really say that. But then it goes on to say, let each of you look not to his own interests. Don't worry so much about what your Facebook page says, but be more interested in the Facebook page of others. Verse 5, then have this mind among yourselves, which is the same mind of Jesus Christ. Now, this is what Jesus was thinking. This was his philosophy in life. His philosophy, even though he was in the form of God, that meant he was God. Even though he was equal with God, and no one could even grasp or understand what that means. It says in verse 7 that Jesus emptied himself. Jesus deleted all of his Facebook contacts. Jesus deleted all of his pictures. Jesus deleted all of his posts, because nothing was going to point to the importance of Jesus unless it pointed to the people that he died for. That's hard to figure out. It really is. You see, if Jesus were King Jesus the ruler, then we would be the ones who would be bowing and scraping for food and fighting and struggling to try to get anything that brings us joy out of life. But Jesus flip-flopped ruling of that day, and he said, if you really want to be important, if you really want to feel like people look at you and want to serve and honor you, then what you have to do is to serve other people. And that's mind-blowing, folks, even in our day-to-day. But it goes on to say that he emptied himself of this. He took the form of a servant. He was born in the likeness of a human being. Happened to be a male human being. And I think that is significant, church. Even though we want to take away any gender identity and we want to allow people to have any identity and gender they want depending on what the day is or how they feel that particular day. But it is important that Jesus was born a man in that culture, in that day, because we see in that culture, in that day, it would be understandable for women to be subservient to men in that day. So Jesus was born a man that should have been exalted but was not, chose not to be. And he took a name upon himself so that in the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is the Lord. Now, what Paul is saying here is Jesus came, lived a life, he was a servant of others, and he wants us to understand what it means to be a servant of others. Have any of you ever been to a foot washing service before? I'm just curious. Not trying to embarrass anybody. I'm curious. Anybody been to a foot washing service? 1, 2, 3? Well, several of you. I remember going to my first service where someone pulled out the bowl of water and the towel, and I knew what was going to happen, and I felt so uncomfortable, I wanted to sneak out of that service. But I didn't. It was a very humbling experience, somewhat gross. I mean, honestly, In the day when they used that illustration, people came in from walking dusty roads, and so yeah, their feet needed to be clean, but they had servants come, and the servants washed the feet of the guests. Then they came on in and enjoyed fellowship and time together. But what Jesus was saying in that culture is, when a guest comes to your home, you go open the door yourself and don't leave it up to a servant to invite your guest in. I don't want to wash people's feet. If it was a cultural thing to do, I'd be willing to do it. I'm willing to go open the door. I'm willing to ask people to come in. I'm willing to take their coats and hang it up in the closet. I am even willing to stoop down and untie their shoes and place them in the shoe rack. And for those of you who live in homes where you don't usually walk in your home with shoes on, you know what I'm talking about. But it's hard to get your hands dirty and wash that gooey stuff out between people's toes. But spiritually speaking, that's what Jesus is saying. We've got to be willing to risk humility to the point that it becomes very difficult and painful. Because when we come to the end of our life, when we look back at the life that we lead, we ought to be able to say, we did not have to climb on the backs or shoulders of other people to be raised above the crowd. That what we did in life was done because of our love and respect for God's people. So when Jesus came and he taught this, and Paul began to spread this word around and talk to other churches about this, they struggled with that. They really did. And we still struggle with it because it gets to the core of humility. And most of us, honestly, struggle with humility. I do. There's no doubt about that. You can ask anybody who knows me, and all my life I've had to struggle with that. But I think most all of you do as well in one way or another. Because there's something within us that wants us to feel that we are more important. And we see that in nature, because when two animals are fighting for food, have you ever noticed one stop and kind of just back away and let their friend little lion eat the food? And so in nature, it's natural to have to struggle and fight for what you want. And we even feel that way at work. We feel that way at church. We feel that way in family and relationships. That we've got to stand up for what's ours. We've got to fight for what's right. And what Jesus wants all of us to remember is that we don't have any rights in life that he doesn't give us. There's nothing that we deserve in life that he doesn't allow for us. And so when we think about humility, I want to tie off on this thought that James mentioned last week, and I want to carry it forward. I needed to look it up. I wanted to get some more background on that. It's a thought that came from Rick Warren. I'm sure that he heard it or put it together from a combination of a couple of other individuals. We really don't know all the thoughts in life. Like Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, there's really nothing a whole lot original under the sun, even words and phrases. But I want you to look at this because it's really significant to understand that humility, it's not thinking less about yourself. That's not what humility says. Humility is thinking about yourself less. Let's walk backwards a little bit and think about that again. Then I want to take us through a scripture that talks about family being first, because this is going to be the topic for today. I'm going to take you through that scripture, and some of it's going to be controversial, and some of it many of you may challenge or want to disagree, or you've heard different teachings on that, because it has to do with the family and authority within the family. And then we're going to close out with reflection on the Lord's Supper. So humility is not thinking less of yourself. In other words, you need to realize who you are in God's eyes. You're important. You are the reason that Jesus Christ came, left heaven, came to earth, walked the earth. He was crucified. He died. He was buried. He rose again. He went to heaven, all for us. All for us. That's something worth being excited about. But what we end up doing oftentimes with that is elevating our level of importance and not realizing that he also died for the person sitting next to you on both sides. He also died for the person across the state, across the country, across the world. He also died for those who, in my value, would be unworthy because of the life they live or the life they lived. And it's hard to ever imagine that Jesus were to die for someone like an Osama bin Laden. Would you agree? It really is. It's hard to believe that Jesus would have done that. But it says that Jesus Christ died once for all, once for everyone. He died for the just and the unjust so that he might bring us to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. And that's what we're talking about today. And how that impacts our lives. So if you're a Christ follower, then we're really obliged to live by this. We really are. We need to work as hard as we can to live this way, putting other people first, putting other people ahead of us, even when it's tough, even when it doesn't seem right, even when it's really hard, and it's hard. Now, that doesn't mean if they're going to kill someone, or if they're going to do something unjust, or if they're going to commit a robbery or do something that's going to really harm somebody else. No, I'm talking about when it comes to people's opinions, we need to let people have their opinions. I mean, that's just part of life. And we don't need to feel that we're more important than they are. That's why when I answered that phone while I was talking to you, most of you thought, what in the world's going on? This is really weird. But I believe many of you thought for a moment, why would he even stop and pick up the phone and answer it when he's right in the middle of talking to me? Doesn't that make you feel kind of bad? Feel like you're really not worth it? Like I don't value you? And so today we're going to be looking at humility in the context of family. Later on we'll look at humility in the context of work and our responsibilities outside of the home. We'll look at humility, and we'll look at what it means to come in second from the perspective of the community and where we live. We'll look at the importance of humility in the context of the church. These are going to be things that are going to walk us up to the 40th anniversary celebration, and then we're going to recognize why we are here: to love God, serve ourselves. Wait, there I go again. It's hard. No, I'm joking. Love God, serve others, change the world. So today we're going to sing Under God, Family is First. Under God, family is first. Now, I'm going to be reading from a scripture text. It's in Ephesians. And if you remember the hashtag series that we did, we talked about walking in the light, and we talked about what's trending in our lives and how we walk and the things we do and the places we go, and whether or not we're in the light or the dark kind of discloses a lot about who we are. Remember that series? We just got through with that. Now we're going to jump to the end of that chapter in Ephesians chapter 5, and we're going to see an application of that, trying to understand how we practice and receive humility within the context of our family. Now, before I do that, because this is a controversial text, because it talks about the position of the man and the woman and the children in the family. It also talks about slaves and bond slaves. It talks about people in the position of ruling in the society and positions of serving in the society. But we're going to focus in on the family, because I believe if we can't understand the importance of putting family members first, then we're going to have a problem doing that at work. We're going to have a problem doing that at school or anywhere else we go. So looking at this is going to be a little controversial, because there are people out there who believe differently than other people do regarding authority, regarding the fall that took place in creation. Now, I don't mind naming a few names every now and then. I just mentioned Rick Warren, gave credit to him. Now I need to mention another guy by the name of John MacArthur. Many of you love John MacArthur. Listen to him. I think he's a great expository preacher. I think he gets into the breaking down of the words and the exegesis and the cultural. He can spend 15 years preaching through the Gospel of Luke. Seriously. But there's a whole group of people that follow his teaching who believe and actually teach, and I'm going to quote this from John MacArthur so you don't think that I'm saying it or making it up. But he says, and I quote, "The stigma of the fall is on women. Women led in the fall." Now, there's a problem that I have with Southern Baptists. I love Southern Baptists, and there's some things about Southern Baptists I don't like, but there's some things about me that I love, and there's some things about me that I don't like. And I could probably name the same thing about you that I love and some things about you that I don't like. That's just the way we are. And so theology is the same way. So before we jump into this, let's establish this principle that in creation, God did create man first, then he created a woman, and all this took place after the world was created, after water, after fish, after plants, after animals, after birds. Then bam, at the very end of creation, God created man. He did not create man to be alone. He created woman as a partner, a complement to him. She is the cherry on the ice cream. She is the fill in the blank. When God did that, it was perfect. And then for whatever reason, God allowed evil to enter into the world. And God told Adam very clearly, Adam, you are to care for this creation. You are to care and protect and watch over this woman that I have given to you. And then when evil entered into the world, this group of theologians who believed that women were the cause of the fall, they go back and say because Eve spent time listening to the serpent and took from the tree that she caused sin to enter the world. Now, maybe some of you believe that, and I don't want you to revolt against me. I really don't want you not to like me, but if you want to talk about this, we can a little bit more, but let me give you my take on this. It's a slightly different take. What I believe is that God told Adam his responsibility as a watchkeeper, his responsibility as a sentry, as a guard at the gates of the family, was to protect the family and to make sure nothing came in from outside that would bring destruction into the family. Now, some of you are in the position of being the protector in your home, and some of you women are so thankful for your big, strong husband, and you're just thinking if anyone were to try to break in, that your husband would be there and would stop them and would be your salvation. And that's a wonderful feeling, ladies. I hope it gives you safety. I don't feel quite the same way about my wife, and some of you may not feel the same way about your spouse. That's why we have security systems. But I believe that the sin that entered in the world was the fact that Adam was not on duty when God allowed the serpent to come and engage in conversation with Eve. Now, again, whether we say, well, the result's the same, they both ate, they both fell, they both lost their position, that's one way to look at it, but I believe that God clearly gave Adam a responsibility, and that responsibility as the man, as the head of the household, was that of protector and watch keep, while God gave so many special, wonderful gifts to the woman as compassion and as love and caregiver and nurturer, and together as a protector, watchkeeper, and a caregiver and a nurturer, when the two come together and become one and have one flesh, guess what happens? Kids are born. And kids become a responsibility. And then mom has a responsibility to kids, and dad has a responsibility to kids, and that makes family. And that's why if we as a nation don't keep family first in our nation is going to disintegrate. And I believe that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing the disintegration of the family in this country, and that's why this country is beginning to disintegrate, because family is the building block of society. Can you agree with me? Family is the building block of society. And when families are not following Christ, when families are not focused on what's right and what's good, when families break down and all of a sudden they care more about what's good for them as individuals, there's fighting, there's bickering, there's in-house stuff that's going on, and it slowly begins to chip away at the life of the family, and it's the same thing with the church. Church. It's the same way. 40 years we've been married. This is our 40th year anniversary, and the only way the enemy can come in is if the watchkeepers of the gate let their guards down, and if the caregivers and the nurturers don't love and care, and the children go astray, and all of a sudden the family in the church breaks down, the world influences the church, and before we know it, the church at North Hills begins to disintegrate. Now, we've gone through a lot in 40 years, and I've only been here for 1/10 of those 40 years. But I've been a part of other churches, and I've seen that struggle. I've seen churches go through that. Something changes, and someone doesn't like it. Oh my, why did they do that? We're going to begin doing some accent painting through here. We're going to be changing the flooring on the outside, and people are going to come in and go, yeah, I don't like that. Don't like that at all. Well, I can understand no one's going to like everything, and that's understandable. But do we like what we're doing as a family? And is North Hills making an impact on the community? And is this going to be helpful in what we do for the next 40 years? That's what family does. Family sits down, talks through these things. Family appoints and or allows appointed authority within the family to stand watch guard, do what they're called to do, be caregivers, give care and do what they're called to do. And that's the organizational model we have at North Hills. We have authority, we have responsibility, delegated a certain authority, and we have those who are in caregiving positions, and God gives us a vision. And when we are divided on the way those responsibilities fall in place, then we are going to be distracted regarding our vision. So we're going to look at Ephesians chapter 5. We're going to begin picking up around verse 22, 23. I want to read that through, and then I'm going to talk about the responsibility of the husbands and the wives and the kids. So before we get in the first point, let me read this, and let's see if we can kind of get an idea of what Paul is trying to say. Because the guy that wrote this is the same guy, Paul, that wrote about Jesus to the Philippian Christians. So remember I told you that this is kind of picking up down below the hashtag series. So remember we preached the trending, the hashtag, and we talked about all the things that were trending and how we ought to walk in the light as he is in the light, and do those things that display or disclose our relationship. So what I'm talking about today is the outward sign of our inward belief. The way we live, the way we communicate is going to be the outward sign for how we believe on the inside. Now in verse 21, Paul starts by saying, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now, this is the guideline for this whole message. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Men submit to women out of reverence for Christ. Women submit to men out of reverence for Christ. Kids submit to parents out of reverence for Christ. And yes, there are times that mom and dad submit to kids, just a few times. Doesn't happen very often at all. Well, really, I heard of it happening one time, but I'm not sure I remember. Well, I'm not sure if that guy was telling the truth anyway. So I'm not really sure about the kids submitting to parents. But every now and then, it's not a bad idea for parents to recognize the importance of kids. So let's just read through this, and I want to point out three quick things, and then we'll have our reflection, which we're going to tie into the Lord's Supper. So we all need to submit to one another. Is that clear? Does that mean women submit to men? Does that mean men submit to women? Well, if it means submit to one another, unless he was only writing to the men, then it would have to imply that. And then he says clearly, all right, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. So Jesus is the head of the church. Jesus is the Savior of the church. In the same way, I am suggesting to you, and not being dogmatic about it, that husbands are the protecting, defending force within a family structure. And once moms and kids submit to that proper understanding of dad, he can be your hero. And there's nothing better than when dad gets to be the hero. It's a wonderful feeling. Compare that to dad being the drunk and mom and the kids coming home and wondering, is dad asleep or is he awake? God created man in the family to be the hero. So then he says, talking about the church, that now the church submits to Christ, as also a wife will submit in everything to her husband. Now, we've got to use a little common sense, because if a husband comes in and says, wife, I demand that you lick the dirt off the sole of my feet. Yeah, that is a bad illustration, isn't it? Well, it tied into the feet washing, right? I mean, everything connects somewhere. So if the man of the household says foot washing in my house takes place when the king comes home and the wife bows down and she licks the sole of my feet and cleans the dirt off my feet. Yuck. Now, does it make any sense, just using practical sense, does it make any sense that that would ever happen, first of all? And if it does happen, do you think that's what Paul's talking about here? I don't think so. So let's go on and try to figure this out. Because later it says that husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Now that makes sense. Because a husband who loves the wife as Christ loves the church would never do that, because it was Christ that washed the feet of the disciples, right? So ladies, when you go home today, it could be appropriate to say, my husband, my lover, my defender of my family, would you wash my feet as Christ washed the feet of the church? Try it. Go ahead. Now, if your husband's not a Christ follower, you may have some problems there. But if he is, you can point to the scripture and say, look, you love the church, you love me, just like Christ loved the church, just like Christ loves me. And he would do anything for the church. He laid down his life for the church. Husband, wash my feet. Or at least the dishes. Would you just do the dishes? That would be nice if you just go into the kitchen. All you got to do is put these things in that thing, put soap in this thing, close the door and push a button. How hard is that? I never have figured that out. Now, how hard it is. I know how to wash dishes. I've never figured out why that's so hard. So Christ loves the church. He gave himself to the church. In the same way, women love to be submissive. Husbands love their wives because Christ loved the church and gave himself up for the church so that he might sanctify her, cleansing her by the washing of the water with the word, in verse 27, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. Men, this is how we should see our wives. Then he talks about how a man leaves his father, mother, joins his wife. What profound mystery this is. And that basically the need of a woman is to be loved, and the need of a man is to receive respect. And you've heard that if you've ever been to a marriage conference. A woman needs to be loved. It means she needs to feel cared for, protected, watched over, adored. And a man needs to feel respected, that he's doing his job. And then we see in verse 1 of chapter 6, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for it is right. Honor your father and your mother, that it may go well with you, just like in the Old Testament, that was the promise. And then he talks about bondservants and others in society. And the order is dictated by humility. So whatever order we have in life, it's dictated by the attitude of our humility. And it doesn't mean that we think little of ourselves. It doesn't mean we belittle ourselves. It just means we don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about ourselves. So I want to make these 3 quick points. And no, that wasn't the introduction that I just got through. That was the text. That was the foundation. But I want to draw 3 simple thoughts for you to take with you. The first thought is, for husbands to be first, you have to be last. That's the example of Christ. Christ could have been first, but he chose to be last. He chose to lift others up and to put himself in a position that didn't need glory. He had it because of who he was. Husbands, if you don't feel that you have respect in your home, most likely it's because you've not earned respect. Most likely you've acted disrespectful. You've used words or phrases. You've acted in such a way that shows no respect for your wife whatsoever. You have belittled her. You have made her feel like a slave in her own home. And she's not going to show you that respect. As hard as it will be for her to try and not to, she's not going to be able to. And so if you really want to be first, you have to understand the principle of being satisfied or joyful being last. There's only one way I can really understand that, and it's when I'm caught in traffic and it's like there's a light and the light stops up there and I'm way back at the end. I'm the last person at the end of the very last part of the line. I am last. And all of a sudden I realize that the light's broken. And guess what? Everybody else is parked up so close to each other, nobody can back up and go around them. But yet all I have to do is just back up, go around. Some of you may have done that before. I have. And it hit me that sometimes when we rush to be in the front of the line, when we rush to be in first place, before we know it, someone else opens up an aisle, and guess what? Someone else gets to go to that aisle and be ahead of you. That's life. If we are always struggling in life, trying to get the most out of the stock market's movement, trying to get the most out of the movement in real estate, trying to get the most out of fastest lane. I am a lane changer. Anybody else a lane changer here? I'm constantly looking for which lane is going to position me best so I will have the greatest advantage to make the most distance in the shortest amount of time. That's the way I am. I'm always changing lanes. And then about an hour later, I see this little old truck with a frog on it just scooting right on past me, and it reminds me of the story of the tortoise and the hare. I promise I'm just like that. I spend so much energy, so much emotion trying to get in the fastest lane that will position me, and this other guy's just kick back, listen to the music, just stay in his lane, and he's right next to me. So husbands, to be first, we really truly need to understand what it means to be last. Wives, let's look to this. To be first, your husband has to think he's first. All right, now, go ahead and chuckle about that for just a moment if you want. But women, if you really want to be first, make your husbands feel like they're first. Now, this isn't a trick. I believe that this is a God-ordained way. There's something about when you love and evaluate and elevate and escalate someone else's life, they're going to look at you and say, wow, why are you being so nice to me? Did I do something wrong? Or are you trying to get back at me? Are you being sarcastic? But if you are consistently respectful towards your husband in things that he does, even though it may not seem to be respectful, something's going to happen. Your husband's going to snap. He's going to lose it. And he's going to think, wow, you really do love me, don't you? That's what Paul's talking about. He's talking about women seeing the man that God's given them as a man of importance in her life. And realizing that often taking a second seat or a back seat is getting up and serving someone else first. And the third thought I want to leave with you, and this is kind of for the kids. Kids, if you want to get really what you think will make you feel first in life, don't make your parents feel they're stupid. All right, now I want you to think about this for just a moment. There's something about kids that are between 0 and 5. All they know is wah, 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 I'm wet, I'm hungry, I'm stinky, do something. They don't know why they're doing that. There's something in life with kids between the ages of 6 and 10 or 11 that they just act dumb because they just act dumb. They don't even know they're acting dumb. They're exploring life. They're trying to figure out what's right. They're trying to figure out how to get people to like them and how to get what they want. But there's something that happens in this age period, somewhere around 10 or 11 up to around 20, where kids that are this age kind of know what they're doing, But they do it in a way that they make their moms and their dads feel so stupid, so ignorant, like they're born thousands of years ago before there was even television. They don't know what they're doing, and you have kind of this belittling attitude. Now, I'm not saying any of you individually do, but some of you do, and most of you do. Probably all of you do. I'll ask your parents later, but there's a really good chance that all of you probably belittle your parents. I mean, just be honest. Either in your mind or in your actions. You think they're old fogies, they don't know what they're talking about. They just need to stay out of your life, give you food, cell phones and money and place to, hang out in a big bedroom and lots of good stuff. That's what parents are for. But in the big scheme of things, but have patience, your turn's coming. Okay? You will be able to get back later. I mean, when they're older, but then you're having to care for them. But the point is, that kids have their place in home, and kids honor their moms and their dads when they show respect toward them. I know that's hard for some of you, especially for some of you who don't have believing moms and dads. But what we're trying to say in this message today is that if we put family first, and in the order of the family, everyone in some way is first, but yet every way in some way is second. We all are lifting up the value of the other, while at the same time we're all lowering our own thoughts of ourselves so that others feel valued. Then we understand the importance of family. It's not that we're thinking less about ourselves. It's not that we're criticizing ourselves or saying we're not worth anything. It's that we're taking time to think more about others and less about ourselves. And some of you are struggling because in some relationships, whether it's in your family, whether it's in your community, whether it's at work, you believe that others are trying to put you down. They're trying to overpower life around you. They're trying to make you feel insignificant and unimportant, and I get that. We all get that. We've all been there. I've been there. We've all felt that way before. The thing is that their struggles are about them, and our struggles are about us. So right now, imagine in your family, whether you're single, whether you're a widow, whether or not you're not married, whether you're a child, what does your family look like? Are people valued? Are the kids cared for? Do mom and dad feel respect and love? When you come together, are you proud to be seen together in public? Or when you get to a mall, do you scatter and hope nobody sees you together? Because whatever that looks like, that's what you're going to look for in the world around you. We're getting ready to have this time of communion today. And a time of communion really is celebrating family. In a lot of ways, it's celebrating family and putting family first. And even when they celebrated communion, Paul was writing to one church in Corinth, and that church in Corinth was having a problem because when they came together to celebrate communion, there were people who were rich, who didn't have to work. They got off early, and they came to celebrate the communion together. And it says that, let me just read in verse 17 in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. But in the following instructions, I do not commend you. Paul's saying, I'm not commending you by what I'm saying because you have come together for this Lord's Supper. That's the context of the Lord's Supper, for the better, but yet you've come together for the worse. In other words, the Lord's Supper is a time where we celebrate church together, but he's saying to them, you've come together and celebrated it for the worse. Because when you come together in the church, there are divisions among you. There are fractions among you. When you come together, it's not the Lord's Supper that you eat. For in eating, each one goes ahead with his own meal. One goes hungry. Another gets drunk. And that was a job, getting drunk on grapefruit juice. But somehow they did it. They overdrank, they overeat. Do you despise God's church in such a way? And humiliate, which is the opposite of humble. Humiliate is exactly the opposite of humble. You humiliate those who have nothing. What can I say to you? I can't commend you. By no means, North Hills, am I indicating at all that's the situation in North Hills Church. Things are happening here. We're excited. The school year opened up. We have a blessed number of students in the preschool as well as in the school. We're just getting excited about the 40th. There's so much to be happy for and excited about. Why would we want to focus on division? So right now, as we get ready for the Lord's Supper, James is going to be coming forward in just a moment, kind of give you an outline for who we are and why we do it and who can take it. And then we'll serve it and everyone will get it, and nobody will take from the cup or the bread until everyone else has been served, because no one should go first in this situation. I'm not a priest, some high and holy priest up here where I'm wearing some robe and some big pulpits separating me from you, and I'm the one that takes it in your name. We all are in this together. We're all in this together. But pray and ask yourself, in your family circle, do others feel first?